Hey everybody, these are 5 criminal cases that will shock you. Give us a like and we'll start with the first story.
The 20-year-old model Dorothy Stratten possessed everything: youth, allure, wealth, triumph, and a cherished partner. She was nicknamed the Canadian Cinderella. Dorothy was foreseen to have a bright future in the limelight, but destiny had different intentions. Dorothy Ruth Hoog Stratten was her complete name. She entered the world on February 28, 1960, in a humble neighborhood of Vancouver, on the city's fringe. Her parents relocated to Canada from the Netherlands a year following Dorothy's birth. The Hoog Stratten family then embraced a son, John, and after 7 years, a younger sister, Louise. The Hoog Strattens led a very simple life. Dorothy excelled academically in school. She never aspired to become a celebrity, nor contemplated a glamorous career. During her childhood, all Dorothy yearned for were basic things that her impoverished family couldn't provide. In 1977, as a high school student, Dorothy worked as a waitress at a local fast food joint, Dairy Queen. Sporting blonde hair, a charming face, and an advanced figure for her age, the 17-year-old quickly garnered attention from patrons. Not just young males, but also older, prosperous men were captivated by her beauty. One evening, roughly 30 minutes before the closure of the snack bar where Dorothy was employed, a captivating young man named Paul Snyder walked in. He quickly spotted the young, appealing waitress. Paul made his order, and upon payment, he presented her with a high-denomination bill. Dorothy mentioned she couldn't provide change for such a large amount. Paul grinned and suggested she keep the change, on the condition she'd go on a date with him. Without any delay, the girl consented. At that time, 26-year-old Paul Snyder was quite a familiar figure in Vancouver. His job involved managing and scouting so-called night butterflies for club gigs. He had numerous friends and connections throughout Canada. When Paul first laid eyes on 17-year-old Dorothy, a tall blonde with a radiant white smile and a graceful physique, he instantly recognized her immense potential. Paul took the stunner out on a date to a fancy restaurant, and afterwards, he gifted her a red evening gown, which she later donned for her high school prom. Paul and Dorothy initiated their relationship. Her parents remained unconcerned about their romance and didn't restrict their daughter from seeing a man 9 years her elder. A few months into their relationship, Paul started coaxing the blonde to engage in a daring photo shoot. At first, Dorothy was reluctant, but Paul persisted, asserting that she had excellent prospects in modeling and could earn a substantial income. Finally, she agreed to his suggestion. Paul secured a studio, employed a professional photographer, and arranged for the waitress to participate in a nude-themed photo shoot. Once the photos were completed, he forwarded them to the editorial team of the globally renowned men's magazine, Playboy. Dorothy's pictures created a stir. A Playboy editor invited her to Los Angeles. Aware that her parents would disapprove of her working for such a provocative magazine, Paul fabricated Dorothy's mother's signature, claiming she permitted her daughter to ink a deal with the famed magazine. In the summer of 1979, Paul and Dorothy journeyed together from Canada to the United States, landing in Hollywood. By August, Dorothy Stratten had risen to fame as Playboy magazine's Playmate of the Month, and subsequently, she started working as a bunny at the Playboy Club. She admitted to her friends over the phone that her new role was quite overwhelming. Unaccustomed to such limelight, she found it daunting as affluent men were smitten with the model, eager to spend time with her and lavishing her with praises. Paul Snyder was constantly by her side, offering his support. He took on the roles of her manager and chauffeur, organizing photo shoots and negotiating contracts. Dorothy's existence was entirely dominated by this man. To strengthen their bond, Paul proposed marriage. The model was initially unsure about marrying, but ultimately consented, feeling indebted to him. Dorothy realized that without Paul Snyder, she would likely still be a waitress at a snack bar, reliant on tips. Her life would not have taken its fairy tale turn. Dorothy's family cautioned her against marrying Paul, suspecting that he was exploiting the young woman for financial gain. In 1979, the same year, Paul and Dorothy tied the knot in Las Vegas. The wedding was simple, without any lavish festivities. The duo remained industrious post-marriage. Dorothy was involved in filming several movies, where directors acknowledged her not just for her beauty and allure, but also for her acting prowess. As Dorothy's fame and earnings escalated, she used her income to purchase a spacious home in Los Angeles, where she resided with her husband. Paul Snider was content with his wife's achievements. He boasted to his friends that Dorothy's rising popularity was a collective success. Acting as her manager, he was a constant presence at her shoots and events, overseeing their finances and assets. He also kept a close watch on her diet, clothing choices, alcohol intake at social gatherings, and occasionally guided her on whom to engage with intimately among influential figures to further her career. Speculations arose about Dorothy having a romantic liaison with Hugh Hefner, the chief editor of Playboy magazine. However, Hefner refuted these claims, asserting that Stratten was not a woman of loose morals. As time progressed, the model began to discern that her husband, Paul, was exerting excessive control over her life. She appointed a new professional manager and started excluding her husband from photo shoots, fabricating various pretexts. The gap between the couple widened, and sensing this, Paul's mental state deteriorated. He guarded his wife with insane jealousy, even employing a private detective to monitor her movements. Yet, no incriminating evidence surfaced. Paul began to impose restrictions on his wife's wardrobe, disallowing her from wearing provocative attire, not wanting men who offered no financial gain to their family to admire her. He instigated conflicts, and in moments of rage, even resorted to physical abuse. Dorothy found herself unable to endure her husband's aggressive outbursts and increasingly sought distance from him. Their friends and colleagues observed the mounting troubles in Paul and Dorothy's marriage. Staff at Playboy frequently advised the model to terminate her relationship with her husband. While Dorothy was occupied with photo shoots, Paul resided in their house, utilizing his wife's earnings and languishing in inactivity. One day, he discovered that Dorothy had established a company under her name and was actively investing in it. This move, advised by her manager, was strategically arranged so that in the event of a divorce, Paul Snider would not have any claim over the money. Paul's behavior escalated into creating more scandals, as he found his influence over his wife waning, with her seldom returning home. Snider began to grasp that his control over what he deemed his golden ticket was slipping through his fingers. In the spring of 1980, at a gathering in the Playboy mansion, 20-year-old Dorothy encountered the renowned 40-year-old film director, Peter Bogdanovich, a close associate of Hugh Hefner. The director was captivated by the model and extended an invitation for her to act in his upcoming comedy, They All Laughed. Dorothy accepted the offer to portray the role of a mistress. On March 22nd, Stratten embarked on a solo trip to New York for the filming of the comedy. She misled her husband, claiming that the director had prohibited anyone besides the cast and crew from being on set. She convinced Paul to remain in Los Angeles. In truth, she feared that Paul might create disturbances during the shoot. Furthermore, the blonde requested her manager to filter calls from her overbearing husband. During her time on set in New York, Dorothy found herself deeply enamored with Bogdanovich. A fervent romance blossomed between the actress and the director. Dorothy exuded joy in the company of this new figure in her life, not wanting to forego the opportunity with the sophisticated, affluent, and influential director. Her demeanor towards her husband grew distant and aloof. Dorothy spent 2 months in New York, and throughout this period, Paul Snider was left alone in their large house in Los Angeles. He sometimes brought other women home, who were astonished to discover that Paul was being unfaithful to such a stunning spouse, a Playboy model. In April 1980, Dorothy returned to California for the Playboy Awards ceremony. She earned the prestigious title of Playmate of the Year and graced the magazine's cover, gaining a new accolade. As part of her recognition, she received a lavish gift from Playboy, a Jaguar sports car, and a cash award of $200,000. She had developed a close friendship with Hugh Hefner, the chief editor, who harbored great expectations for the rising star. Following the ceremony, Dorothy embarked on a 2-week promotional tour across Canada. On weekends, she flew out for dates with director Peter Bogdanovich. She intended to spend the final days of the tour with her family in Vancouver. Upon learning this, Paul Snider immediately flew to Canada, leveraging his past experience as a nightclub manager and his numerous connections in Vancouver. During Dorothy's brief holiday, Paul coerced her into working in clubs and pocketed all the profits. During this time, a significant altercation erupted between the couple, where Dorothy, in tears, suggested quitting her career to salvage their marriage. She proposed that they both return to her parents and start afresh. Snider, however, rejected this idea. After the tour in Canada, Dorothy returned to New York and continued filming the comedy, They All Laughed. She ignored her husband's calls and further distanced herself from him. One day, Dorothy called Paul herself and asked for more freedom in their relationship. Snyder was in depression and very angry with his wife. It is known that at that time, Paul Snyder was involved with a young girl who was not yet 18 years old. She had a model-like appearance, and Paul wanted to make her a new Playboy bunny. However, he soon realized that his young lover would never be able to overshadow his wife. In June 1980, on their first wedding anniversary, Paul received a distressing letter from Dorothy. She expressed her desire for a divorce in the letter and declared that she would cease to provide him with financial support. This confirmed Paul's fears. He was now convinced that Dorothy was being unfaithful with the director Peter Bogdanovich. In response, Snyder employed a private investigator to collect evidence of his wife's alleged affair. On one occasion, Paul called Dorothy's manager, threatening to create a disturbance or possibly do something even more drastic. The manager cautioned Dorothy to hire a bodyguard and be cautious of her envious husband, but the model disregarded this advice. As a non-resident alien in America without a green card, Paul faced employment barriers. His financial resources were dwindling, leading him to deplete their joint bank accounts. He liquidated Dorothy's valuable items, including collectibles, jewelry, and the Jaguar sports car she'd been gifted by Playboy. He offloaded these assets at steep discounts, strictly accepting cash transactions. Moreover, Paul started renting out rooms in their expansive home to friends, partly driven by his depression and loneliness. Gradually, he began to contemplate returning to his homeland, Canada. In mid-July, the shooting for They All Laughed wrapped up. Subsequently, Dorothy and Bogdanovich embarked on a 10-day getaway to England. They returned to Los Angeles together on July 30th, with Dorothy moving into the director's mansion located in the upscale Bel Air neighborhood. On the afternoon of July 31st, Paul Snyder borrowed a handgun from an acquaintance. Late that evening, he approached Peter Bogdanovich's residence, armed. Paul concealed himself nearby, resolute in his decision to shoot anyone who approached the mansion's gates. After several hours of waiting and growing impatient, Paul drove to a mountainous area that overlooked nocturnal Los Angeles. He later confided to a friend that during his solitary time in the mountains, he was tormented by harrowing thoughts of taking his own life. Late into the night, Snyder made his way back to their home. A week later, on August 8th, Paul managed to convince Dorothy to meet him at their residence. He harbored hopes of rekindling their relationship, reminiscent of the charm he wielded in the modest diner where they first encountered each other. However, Dorothy who arrived was no longer the naive schoolgirl he once knew. She had transformed into a self-assured woman, no longer swayed by her husband's persuasions. Dorothy revealed to Paul her love for another man and her intention to divorce. Snyder, maintaining his composure, requested that she return in a week to calmly discuss the particulars of their separation. The following day, Paul zealously set out to purchase a firearm. He scoured shops, but his Canadian citizenship deterred sellers from transacting with him. He even asked his private investigator to procure a rifle under the pretext of self-protection and home security, but the detective dissuaded him and declined to assist. On August 11th, Snyder spotted an ad in the newspaper. A hunter was selling his old 12-gauge shotgun. He drove to the San Fernando Valley, intending to inspect and potentially acquire the firearm. Unfortunately, he lost his way, failed to locate the address, and had to return without the shotgun. On August 13th, 2 days later, Paul revisited the same location. This time, he successfully found the seller and purchased the aged shotgun, telling the seller of his plans to go hunting. On August 14th, in anticipation of his meeting with Dorothy, Paul Snyder requested his roommates to vacate the house until evening to ensure uninterrupted privacy for his conversation with his wife. Dorothy's managers and assistants had urged her to let them accompany her to the meeting or to handle the divorce discussions over the phone. However, Dorothy chose to go alone. She carried a substantial amount of money with her, intending to express her gratitude to Paul generously for his past contributions to her life. She aimed for a peaceful separation and hoped to maintain a cordial relationship. Believing the meeting would be brief, she scheduled a photo shoot for later that evening. Dorothy arrived at her home at noon on August 14th to meet with Paul Snyder. He courteously welcomed her inside. Shortly after, her phone rang. It was a safety check call from her manager. They had prearranged that if Dorothy encountered any trouble, she would use a specific code word during the call. She assured the caller that all was well and quickly concluded the conversation. The discussion between Dorothy and Paul continued, but it eventually escalated into a dispute. In a sudden, violent outburst, Paul Snider produced the shotgun and fatally shot Dorothy in the face. It was reported that following this heinous act, Paul engaged in a necrophilic act with his deceased wife before turning the gun on himself. At 8 p.m., the roommates returned to the house, noticing Stratten's car parked outside. Inside, they found the model's handbag in the living room. Assuming that Paul had made up with his wife and they were together in the bedroom, the roommates retreated to their own room, turned on the TV, and endeavored to be as quiet as possible, not wanting to intrude on the couple's privacy. In the meantime, Dorothy's managers became increasingly anxious as she had ceased responding to their calls. At 11 p.m., they finally managed to contact someone at Paul and Dorothy's residence. The roommates took the call, and after hanging up, they decided to check the master bedroom. There, they stumbled upon a gruesome sight. Both Dorothy and Paul were found dead. Forensic specialists concluded that the 20-year-old Dorothy Stratten had died approximately 1 hour after her arrival at the house. Her 29-year-old husband, Paul Snider, died about an hour following his wife's death. Hugh Hefner was among the first to be informed of the tragic event. He took it upon himself to contact his friend, Peter Bogdanovich, to relay the devastating news. Upon hearing about Dorothy's death, Bogdanovich was so overwhelmed that he fainted. Following this, he spent an extended period under the influence of sedatives to cope with the shock and grief. The August edition of Playboy magazine had already been dispatched for printing, making it impossible for the editors to change the cover in time. As a result, it featured Dorothy Stratten, who had tragically passed away. However, for the annual Playboy calendar, her image was substituted with that of another model. Hugh Hefner offered his perspective on the tragic incident, stating, "There is a stereotype that a poor girl from a small town makes it to the pages of a magazine, moves to Hollywood, builds a dazzling career, and then dies tragically at the height of her powers. But it's not always the case. Paul Snider was a sick jerk who realized that his lucky ticket was slipping away, and that's what drove him to commit this awful act." Peter Bogdanovich took charge of organizing and funding Dorothy Stratten's funeral. The loss of his beloved profoundly impacted him. He decided on cremation for her remains, which were then interred in a cemetery in Los Angeles. Following the tragic demise of the model, the film studio chose not to release They All Laughed. Bogdanovich, determined to showcase the work, purchased the film rights using his own finances. The comedy They All Laughed was eventually released in 1981. Despite the efforts, the film did not garner any significant accolades and failed to captivate the audience's interest. This commercial failure led Bogdanovich to lose millions and ultimately resulted in him declaring bankruptcy. Several years after Dorothy Stratten's passing, rumors surfaced about director Peter Bogdanovich secretly meeting her younger sister, Louise Stratten, who was 13 at the time. The Stratten family strongly refuted these claims and legally contested the spread of these rumors. However, in 1988, 8 years later, the 49-year-old Bogdanovich married 20-year-old Louise Stratten. Louise later stated in interviews that their romance began when she was 18. The union of Peter Bogdanovich and Louise Stratten lasted for 13 years, ending in divorce in 2001. Peter never remarried, dedicating his life to his cinematic endeavors. He passed away in 2022 at the age of 82. Louise Stratten, now residing in her hometown of Vancouver, pursues a career as a Canadian actress and producer. Over 4 decades since Dorothy Stratten's murder, her life and story continue to inspire various creative works, including films, books, and songs. A recent tribute to her is seen in the crime drama series Welcome to Chippendales, which chronicles the story of the famed male strip dance group Chippendales, co-founded by Paul Snider. In this series, Dorothy Stratten is portrayed by Nicola Peltz, who is married into the Beckham family. Amy Weidner became a mother at the tender age of 14, giving birth to a daughter. This development was a challenging ordeal for her mother, Gloria Weidner, who, despite the difficulties, stood firmly by her daughter's side. Unbeknownst to Gloria at the time, the complexity of coping with her daughter's early pregnancy would soon be overshadowed by a far more distressing event that would impact their family just 2 years later. Amy Weidner, born in 1973, was part of a large family, including her older brother John Paul, who was a year older, and two younger sisters, Tawny and Cassie, younger by 1 and 4 years respectively. Their mother, Gloria Weidner, single-handedly raised the children following a long-ago divorce from their father, who played no role in their upbringing. The family of 5 resided in a house in Indianapolis, where Amy was her mother's primary aide, handling cooking, cleaning, and caring for her sisters. A studious girl, Amy harbored dreams of becoming a teacher, known for her bright, cheerful demeanor and engaging smile. At 14, life took an unexpected turn when Amy became pregnant. She was hesitant to share the news with her mother, concealing her growing belly under loose clothing for over 5 months. Her pregnancy remained unnoticed by her family until nearly 6 months in, when hiding it became increasingly challenging. Eventually, Amy mustered the courage to approach her mother, breaking down in tears as she revealed her situation. "Mom, I don't want you to hate me," she tearfully confided. Gloria, though taken aback, embraced her daughter with comforting words of support, despite feeling overwhelmed and unsure about the future. "I was stunned. I just couldn't believe it. I thought it was the worst thing that could happen in my life," Gloria recounted, unaware of the even more heart-rending events that were yet to unfold. Amy Weidner's baby was fathered by 20-year-old Tony Abercrombie, who was a friend of her elder brother. Their relationship was a well-kept secret, with none of their family members aware of the intimacy between them. Upon discovering her daughter's pregnancy, Gloria, Amy's mother, swiftly intervened. She prohibited any further contact between Amy and Tony and insisted that Amy fully sever her ties with the father of her unborn child, laying down strict conditions for her daughter's future interactions. On October 25, 1987, Amy Weidner embraced motherhood by welcoming her daughter Emily into the world. Remarkably, just 6 days after giving birth, Amy resumed her education, now juggling the responsibilities of being a new mother. Gloria Weidner, recognizing the importance of education for her daughter's future, provided unwavering support to Amy, often caring for Emily to facilitate Amy's schooling. Gloria also acknowledged Amy's need for a typical teenage life, allowing her time with friends. Amy's dedication to her studies never waned, even amidst the demands of motherhood. She continued to excel academically, earning accolades from her teachers for her diligence and hard work. The Weidner family adapted to the new addition, sharing the responsibilities of caring for Emily. Life seemed to be realigning on a positive path as the years passed, with Amy successfully navigating her challenges. However, just as they found their footing, a sudden turn of events altered everything. On November 13, 1989, Amy Weidner, aged 16, awoke with a severe sore throat and decided to stay home from school with her 2-year-old daughter, Emily. When Gloria, her mother, offered to take Emily to the nanny, Amy chose to keep her daughter with her. After the family shared breakfast, they dispersed for the day. Gloria headed to work, and Amy's siblings went off to school, leaving Amy and Emily at home alone. Concerned after her 9:30 a.m. call to Amy went unanswered, and again a few hours later with no response, Gloria asked a neighbor to check in on them. The neighbor's report of an unresponsive, quiet house prompted Gloria to leave work and rush home. Upon arrival, she found Emily sitting on the stairs and, receiving no answer to her calls for Amy, ventured upstairs. The scene in Amy's bedroom was a tragic and shocking one. Amy lay lifeless and unclothed on her bed, surrounded by a significant amount of blood. In a state of emergency, Gloria immediately dialed 911. Upon their arrival, the police began a meticulous examination of the Weidner residence. The scene led them to initially suspect an attempted burglary. Missing from the home were stereo equipment and a graphic equalizer, items that belonged to Amy's older brother, John Paul. Notably, from Amy's room, a piggy bank, a simple glass jar containing around $50 saved for school purposes, had disappeared. There were no indications of forced entry into the house. The perpetrator might have entered through an unlocked back door or the front door, potentially opened by Amy herself. Crucial evidence was discovered in Amy's room. Semen on the bed linen, a bloody palm print on the wall, and several strands of hair, both body and head hair, presumably from the assailant. The medical examiner's findings concluded that Amy Weidner had suffered a blow to the head with a sharp object, was sexually assaulted, and ultimately strangled. The realization that Emily, Amy's 2-year-old daughter, could have witnessed the harrowing events is deeply unsettling. Fortunately, she was found unharmed. Recognizing the potential value of any information Emily might provide, the police made an effort to communicate with her, despite her young age of just over 2 years. Utilizing finger puppets to create a more child-friendly environment, they gently probed for any details she could recall. During this interaction, Emily, energetically moving around the room, mentioned only that her mother seemed very angry that day. As part of the evidence collection, the police sectioned off and removed the part of the wall bearing the assailant's bloody palm print. Additionally, they gathered the victim's clothing and bed linens from the crime scene to further their investigation into this tragic case. In the process of investigating Amy Weidner's case, detectives initiated inquiries among her family, friends, and nearby residents. John Paul, Amy's 17-year-old brother, mentioned how the investigators initially suspected him during the interrogation. However, he had a reliable alibi and no evidence linked him to the incident. Tony Abercrombie, Amy's former boyfriend and Emily's father, was also interrogated. He expressed deep affection for Amy and denied any harmful intentions towards her. Tony had a solid alibi for the crime day. The police's attention was also drawn to Troy Jackson, living next to the Weidners. He was aware of the stereo system stolen on the murder day. Despite his denial of involvement and the absence of any bruises or scratches on his hands, Troy provided his hair samples, which did not match those found at the crime scene. After passing a polygraph test, suspicions against him were dropped. Besides these three, the police interviewed other acquaintances, neighbors, and classmates of Amy. Fingerprints and hair samples were taken from all of them, but none fell under suspicion. The funeral for Amy Weidner was held shortly afterward, drawing a considerable crowd who wished to pay their respects. Her death was deeply felt within the community. Detectives attended the funeral too, carefully observing the attendees as part of their ongoing investigation. A particularly poignant memory was a cherished photograph of Amy, where she wore her favorite white turtleneck vest with a floral design. It was in this beloved attire that Amy, a young girl whose life was tragically cut short, was laid to rest. In the aftermath of their tragic loss, the Weidner family clung to the hope that Amy's killer would be swiftly apprehended and brought to justice. Yet, as the days turned into weeks and then months, no suspects were identified. Following Amy's passing, Gloria Weidner legally adopted her granddaughter Emily, stepping into the role of her mother. The weight of grief and fear burdened Gloria. She was haunted by thoughts of the perpetrator, worrying about the safety of her family. She never left her daughters unattended at home and lived in a state of constant anxiety. With the assailant still at large, Gloria considered relocating to a new home for safety. However, financial constraints limited their options, leaving them to face these challenging times in their current residence. Amy's friends, too, were deeply affected by the tragedy. Consumed by fear that the criminal could target them next, they requested their parents to fortify their homes, even boarding up windows with planks as a precautionary measure against a similar fate. Gloria returned home one day, expecting to find her younger daughters back from school. Upon entering, she was met with a disquieting silence. The house felt unusually empty. She noticed the girls' outdoor shoes were in their usual spot. A surge of dreadful thoughts raced through her mind, apprehending another calamity. With each step towards the upstairs, the distance felt increasingly vast. Standing at the threshold of their bedroom, Gloria steeled herself for what she might find. Upon entering, she discovered, much to her relief, that her daughters had merely fallen asleep. As time went on, Emily, Amy's daughter, matured. She was spared the memories of the tragic events surrounding her biological mother. Emily had no recollection of the police interrogation or being informed of her mother's demise. The detectives periodically revisited the Weidner family, inadvertently causing them to revisit the pain of that dreadful day. Gloria revealed that there came a time when the continual revisiting of the past became too much to bear. She yearned for just one thing: for the authorities to allow her family some peace and to cease reawakening memories that could not bring Amy back. 13 years after Amy Weidner's murder, in 2002, an unexpected development arose in the case. The Indianapolis Police Department received a call from a 29-year-old man claiming to have had a dream where Amy communicated with him about her demise. Although he provided details about the murder, most of the information had already been disclosed in news reports. The police investigated this individual, who was 16 at the time of the incident, and resided across the street from Amy's home. His fingerprints and DNA were examined to determine any potential involvement, but no matches were found, leading to his release. While his call didn't contribute significant evidence, it prompted detectives to re-examine the cold case. In 2002, the investigation re-engaged with some of Amy's friends and acquaintances, particularly those who had encountered legal issues over the intervening years. Despite renewed efforts, the investigation once again reached an impasse, leaving the case unsolved. In 2011, a Facebook group titled Remembering Amy Weidner was established by Amy's friends, reigniting interest in her unsolved case. The detective responsible for the cold case, unfamiliar with Facebook, enlisted the help of his colleague, Detective Bill Carter, to print out information from the group. This task piqued Carter's interest in the Amy Weidner case. Although his expertise was in non-homicide-related illegal activities, Carter was compelled to explore the case files of Amy's murder during his free time. Carter delved deep into the 2-decade-old case, scrutinizing every detail in the file, re-examining evidence, reviewing school attendance records from the day of the murder, and scrutinizing the funeral attendance list. He inputted the case details into a database and identified overlooked leads, including several friends of Amy's brother who had never been interviewed by the police, nor had their DNA been collected. In his pursuit of new leads, Detective Carter reached out to the Weidner family and Amy's friends in 2011, seeking names of individuals who might possess information about the case. He initiated DNA collection from persons previously overlooked in the initial 1989 investigation. Following the crime, the police had canvassed the neighborhood where the Weidners lived, documenting residents' names. Carter revisited these records and the area, verifying if any residents still lived at their original addresses. His efforts led him to a woman who lived across the street from the murder scene and was a neighbor and friend of Amy. She attempted to recall the names of boys Amy had been friends with. While she reiterated most of the previously known and investigated names, she also mentioned a name unfamiliar to Detective Carter, Rodney Denk. In 2012, Detective Carter received authorization from the Cold Case Unit to formally take on Amy Weidner's case. His first step was to locate Rodney Denk to ascertain whether he could be a potential suspect. The Weidner family was quite familiar with Rodney, as he was a friend of Amy's older brother, John Paul. They spent time together engaging in activities like biking and fishing. When Carter inquired about Rodney with John Paul, he described him as a reserved individual who largely kept to himself and had never aroused suspicion. Carter visited the home of 40-year-old Rodney Denk, who resided with his mother near the Weidners. Rodney was employed at an auto parts store, had been divorced for some time, and had a grown son with whom he had minimal contact. Upon Carter's arrival at Rodney's residence, his mother greeted him, informing the detective that Rodney was at work. Carter left his business card, requesting Rodney to contact him upon his return. That evening, Rodney called Carter, who promptly requested a meeting to discuss Amy Weidner's murder case. Rodney consented to the meeting and allowed Carter to visit his house. However, when Carter returned for the meeting, Rodney was nowhere to be found. Carter examined Rodney's criminal background and found that he had previous charges for assault in 1991 and theft in 1997. Rodney's fingerprints, already in the database, were compared with the palm print found at the Weidner residence. This test aimed to either connect or exonerate Rodney from the crime. When the results came back, they confirmed a match between Rodney's prints and the bloody palm print at the crime scene. After 23 years, a suspect was finally identified, but Rodney had vanished from his home, prompting an intensive search by the police. The breakthrough came when Rodney's credit card activity revealed a rented car with an OnStar tracking system. The detectives located the car in Indianapolis, where Rodney was hiding at a friend's house. Confronted by the police, Rodney, brandishing a knife and claiming his innocence, injured himself. He attempted to attack the officers but was subdued with a taser, handcuffed, and taken to the hospital. During a 2-day hospital interrogation, recorded on camera, Rodney confessed to Amy's murder. He claimed his initial intent was burglary, not anticipating Amy's presence due to her illness. Rodney recounted entering through a sliding glass door and being startled by Amy. In a state of panic, Rodney Denk hastily grabbed the nearest object and struck the girl on the head, an action that ultimately led to her demise. Over the course of 2 days, as he recounted the incident, Rodney frequently cited his vague recollection of that day's events, attributing it to the 23 years that had elapsed since the crime. His account of his actions was imprecise, and at one point, he even suggested that he had visited the Weidner's house with an acquaintance he referred to as Bag. Rodney struggled to recall clear details about this supposed accomplice, unable to provide a description of his appearance. According to Rodney, Bagg had initially kept watch outside the Weidner residence before joining him inside, where they both confronted the girl. When questioned about Emily, Rodney claimed he did not see her during the incident, nor was he aware of her presence or cries in the house, oblivious to the fact that the little girl had been nearby throughout the ordeal. Throughout the interrogation, Rodney remained composed and polite, not exhibiting behavior typically associated with a murderer, possibly due to the time elapsed since the crime. Rodney Denk's DNA sample was taken and, as anticipated, it matched the semen discovered in 1989 on Amy Weidner's bedsheet and blanket. In a moment of candor, Rodney admitted to the detectives, "I always tried to be a good person, but I guess deep down, I'm not." Both the palm print and semen found at the crime scene were confirmed to be his, with no indications of an accomplice's involvement. The revelation of Rodney's guilt was a profound shock to the Weidner family. They found it hard to reconcile the image of the quiet and unassuming Rodney, who was not only a friend and classmate of Amy's older brother John Paul, but also lived across the street and frequented their home, with his heinous act. Remarkably, Rodney had even attended Amy's funeral, mourning alongside others and extending condolences to Gloria Weidner. Later, Detective Carter discovered Rodney's signature in the guest book at Amy's funeral. It was only upon revisiting the case that he found Rodney's name first brought up in 2003 by Tony Abercrombie, Amy's former boyfriend and Emily's biological father, who mentioned Rodney's regular visits to the Weidner family. Carter surmised that back in 1989, Rodney Denk had somehow evaded attention. For some unknown reason, he was never considered a suspect or questioned at the time. While delving into Rodney Denk's background in 2012, investigators unearthed another grim detail. Rodney's biological son, Dylan Denk, was found to be incarcerated, serving a sentence for a crime committed in 2009. At just 16 years old, Dylan had fatally assaulted his birth mother, Mary McHenry. Dylan claimed he acted out in response to his mother's abuse and insults, ultimately using a baseball bat to inflict the fatal injuries. Tragically, Mary passed away from the wounds inflicted. Dylan turned 17 just days after the incident. This mirrored Rodney's own history, as he was 18 when he committed the murder of Amy. The parallel of father and son committing significant crimes at a similar age struck the detectives as both chilling and peculiar. Rodney's role in Dylan's upbringing was minimal, having divorced Mary McHenry quite early and leaving her to raise their son alone. Despite this, Rodney appeared at Dylan's trial to give testimony. In 2009, Dylan agreed to a plea deal, resulting in a 20-year prison sentence. His anticipated release is in 2029, by which time he will be 37 years old. In the ongoing case of Amy Weidner, Rodney Denk initially maintained that he had an accomplice in the crime, a young man he referred to as Bagg. However, in a turn of events in June 2013, merely 10 days before his trial was scheduled to commence, 42-year-old Rodney recanted his previous statement. He admitted to acting alone in the murder of Amy, asserting that no one else was involved. As a result of this confession and the evidence against him, Rodney received a sentence of 65 years in prison. In 2013, following the resolution of Amy's case, the Weidner family arranged a gathering with Detective Bill Carter. They commemorated the 24 years without Amy by releasing 24 balloons into the sky. Grateful for Detective Carter's pivotal role in the case, the family acknowledged his efforts. It was Carter who, within just 12 days of delving into the case, pinpointed Rodney Denk as the perpetrator and brought the investigation to a close. In recognition of his outstanding work, Detective Bill Carter was honored with an award by the Indianapolis Police Department in January 2014. Despite an offer to join the Homicide Investigation Department, he chose to remain in his current role. Emily Weidner, Amy's daughter, matured into adulthood, graduating from the same high school her biological mother had attended, before pursuing higher education at a university. Seeking broader opportunities, she relocated from Indianapolis to California. Gloria Weidner, Amy's mother, openly shared her enduring grief and daily remembrance of her daughter. She continues to reside in the house where the tragedy unfolded. Amy's room, still adorned with her photographs, now welcomes Gloria's grandchildren during their holiday visits, bringing a new sense of joy and life to a space once marked by loss. When Manhattan resident and mother of two, Shele Danishefsky, was found dead in her bathtub in December 2009, police ruled her death an accident. However, about 6 months after the incident, suspicions led her family to exhume the woman's body, and then an autopsy revealed shocking new details. They launched a murder investigation. New Yorker Shele Danishefsky owned a luxury apartment on Manhattan's Upper West Side. The woman was divorcing Rod Kovlin at the time, and they were suing for custody of their 2 children, 9-year-old Anna and 3-year-old Miles. The ex-husband lived next door in the same complex, and they saw each other periodically. The relationship between Shele and Rod was very strained. People who knew Shele described her as a loving and caring mother, who always put her children above everyone else. Everyone also noted her friendly and gentle nature. In addition to her outer and inner beauty, the woman was very intelligent and accomplished in life in all respects. Colleagues described her as a professional in her business. She was a successful Wall Street investment banker with a fortune of several $1 million. Therefore, her sudden and tragic death came as a shock to everyone who knew Shele. The woman had no enemies at work or in her personal life. At that time, she was single and not in a romantic relationship. Shele devoted herself to raising her children, which was her top priority in life. On the morning of that tragic day, December 31st, 2009, her daughter Anna woke up first and went to the bathtub. There she found a horrific scene. Her mother's body floating face down in the bathtub. The water around her body was red with blood, and the closet door directly above the bathtub had been ripped off its hinges. Shocked and frightened, the girl ran out of the tub and ran to the phone. She dialed her father's number and reported that something bad had happened to her mom. A man living nearby quickly rushed to the apartment. He entered the bathroom and found that his wife was unconscious. Rod notified 911 and emergency services were dispatched to the address. In the meantime, the man took Shele's body out of the bathtub, covered her with a blanket, and tried to give her CPR as instructed by the operator, hoping to resuscitate the woman, but it didn't work. By then, the apartment had already been visited by medics. The door the girl opened. Her father was in the bathtub and did not give up trying to save Shele. Medics checked her pulse. There was none. The body was already cold. Medics stated the death of a 47-year-old woman, as the body showed the first signs of rigor mortis. It was determined that death had occurred about an hour ago. Rod was grief-stricken. He was crying with his children and was very worried about what had happened. The medics even had to sedate him. The police officers, once on the scene, took a close look at the bathtub. They paid attention to the broken cabinet door and assumed that it was the reason for the tragedy. The woman, while in the tub, reached for the cabinet. Shele slipped, fell, hit her head on the tub, lost consciousness, and drowned. The woman had lost a lot of blood due to her head injury, and that explained the red color of the water. It all looked like an accident. The police also checked that there were no signs of breaking and entering the house. Nothing was missing. All valuables were in their places. And overall, the incident did not look like a crime, so the case was closed as an accident. Because the death was ruled an accident, Shele's family cited their religious beliefs and asked that no autopsy be performed. The woman was buried, but immediately after the funeral, serious doubts began to surround her shocking and sudden death. Shele's loved ones began to believe that her death was not an accident and someone was responsible. Shele, because of time constraints, never took a bath with water. She bathed under the shower. Therefore, they had no way of explaining why her body was found in a bathtub full of water. The relatives also recalled that the day before her death, Shele had had keratin straightening of her hair, which she had always done before, in which case she was not allowed to wet her hair for the first 3 days. The woman was certainly aware of this and did not deviate from following the rules. Therefore, she would definitely not bathe in a bathtub. It all went against her habits and couldn't be true. The suspicions became so strong that the relatives asked the police to start an investigation into Shele's death and requested that her body be exhumed. At first, the police did not take these requests seriously because everything seemed obvious. The woman fell in the bathtub, hit her head, and died. But relatives managed to convince detectives to conduct an autopsy on the body. The body of the deceased was exhumed in April 2010 and sent for autopsy. This is where it was discovered that the woman had been strangled before her body was placed in the bathtub. The forensic expert determined that the victim had been strangled with such force that her hyoid bone was broken and several ribs were also broken. The head trauma was not serious and could not have caused death. It looked like the woman died as a result of a violent struggle for life during a chokehold. The perpetrator may have been into martial arts and performed the hold. In addition, a forensic medical examiner who examined photos of the deceased noted fresh bruises on her arms and severe bruising in her eyes. In light of the new circumstances, law enforcement officials had no choice but to launch an investigation into Shele's murder. The investigation of the crime was complicated by the fact that it had been months since the tragedy, and since no one thought her death was a homicide, there was no evidence to work with at the scene. Detectives only had a few photos taken by police officers arriving on the call for a report. Investigators believed that in so many months, all traces had clearly been destroyed during the bathroom cleanup. But despite great doubts, they couldn't help but check. Police officers arrived at the dead woman's apartment for an inspection. It turned out that her children and husband lived there. He graciously allowed the detectives to enter and look around. The CSIs went to the bathroom and, as expected, found absolutely nothing there. Rod said that after the death, the bathroom was thoroughly cleaned several times with a cleaning agent to scrub away all the blood that embarrassed the children and caused them painful memories of their mother. The man was authorized to do this by police officers who were at the apartment on the day of the death. There were no witnesses to the crime. The only people in the apartment were young children who were interviewed, but they did not see or hear anything suspicious. It was noted to investigators that there were no signs of forced entry in the house. So, the perpetrator either got into the apartment with his key or had the door opened for him. The woman probably knew her killer, so they assumed it was someone close to her. After talking to the deceased's loved ones, detectives learned that Shele had no enemies or ill-wishers, but had problems with her ex-husband, with whom she had a bitter dispute over divorce and child custody. Shele and Rod met in 1998 while working on Wall Street. The woman was already successful at that time. Her career was booming and she was already a vice president of a major financial company. Rod was a novice investment trader who had just entered the field. But despite this, Shele and Rod immediately fell in love with each other. The couple began a stormy romance, and after just a couple of months they got married. Everyone around was surprised at such a rapid development of events. Some even advised Shele not to rush into marriage and to take a closer look at the newcomer to the market, who was too quick to win her heart. Acquaintances suspected him of insincerity, but Shele was blinded by love and listened to no one. The newlyweds went to live in the woman's luxurious apartment in the upscale Upper West Side neighborhood near Central Park. Soon they had a daughter, who was named Anna. Shele could not sit in maternity leave for a long time, so she was forced to go to work and hired a nanny to help her. Shele went on to have a successful career and run a company. Meanwhile, Rod could not achieve any success in this activity, despite the help of his wife. In the end, he simply abandoned the job and began to pursue his hobby. Rod was fond of martial arts, received a black belt and participated in competitions. He convinced his wife that he saw his future in sports, where he could achieve great success and become a coach. His wife believed him. Then the man switched to backgammon and then to other hobbies, which he constantly changed. He was infantile. All this time the man sat on his wife's neck and sometimes begged money from his parents. The couple had a second child, a son. It seemed that they were happy, but in fact Rod hid his double life from his wife. In addition to engaging in various hobbies, the man walked on the side. At first he had one girl, then two. But gradually he got into all sorts of things. In his address book there were about 20 girls with whom he constantly met. The man even had to make a schedule of dates on his computer to avoid confusion. He found himself new companions on the internet, did not muffle even meetings with girls of easy behavior. Rod told them all that he was a successful banker from Wall Street, and the girls themselves hung around his neck, hoping to get such a solid fiancé. At home, in his relations with his wife, he behaved insultingly, humiliated his wife in every possible way, and brought her to tears. But his lies could not be endless, and one day they were exposed. The man was exposed by his own wife, who for some time suspected him of cheating. She hired a private detective who gathered all the information about him. It turned out that the amorous Rod simultaneously communicated on the internet with 860 girls. The man did not even refute this information. He admitted to his wife that he could not be faithful only to her, although he stated that he loved her and she suited him for a life together. He offered her a free relationship, to which the wife responded with a categorical refusal. She got tired of tolerating all his antics and filed for divorce. In April 2009, The woman kicked her husband out of the apartment and rented him an apartment not far from home out of pity, because he had nowhere to live, although she later regretted this decision. After the move, Rod realized that in the event of a divorce, he would lose all his assets and the lavish lifestyle he was so accustomed to. Without money, all his new girlfriends would no longer be interested in him. So he began threatening Shele that he would take his wife's children away from her and pursue her in the event of a divorce. The woman didn't want any trouble and was thinking how she could solve the problem with her ex to get him off her back. She offered him a $250,000 payoff, but her husband rejected her offer and demanded more money and full custody of the children. Rod intentionally threatened and manipulated Shele with what was most important to her in life, her children, even though she knew full well that he was never interested in the children. Shele's lawyer advised her not to enter into any negotiations with him. He was sure that with their evidence, the court would be on their side anyway. Shele's ignorance made Rod even angrier, and he moved into action. He first informed his wife's workplace that she was taking illegal substances. Although everyone knew this was untrue, Shele's supervisor could not help but react to this information and sent her to get tested. The result was that she was not taking anything. When this plan did not work, the man wrote the next denunciation of his spouse to the tax office, but even this check showed that she was clean before the law. Then he began to visit his wife's apartment, having his own set of keys, and began to arrange various mischief there for the former. Then he filed a complaint against his wife for molesting his 3-year-old son. As a result, the boy was referred to a child psychologist, who confirmed that nothing of the sort had happened. Shele was on the verge of a nervous breakdown because of the problems her ex was causing, and as a result, her lawyer in court found the man guilty of slander, and he was banned from communicating with his children and wife. The wife obtained a restraining order against Rod. A couple of days before her death, Shele wrote to her lawyer and expressed her desire to change her will, to completely cut out her ex-husband, who was to receive $4 million. As a result, she wanted to leave her entire fortune to her children. They agreed that the lawyer would make all the appropriate changes to the documents, and the woman would come in and sign them on January 1st. But Shele didn't have time to do that. She died literally within a day, which seemed strange. The suspicions of her relatives about Shele's murder were connected precisely with the strange behavior of her ex. They claimed that the woman was very afraid of Rod. The nanny said that she often heard Rod insulting her spouse, being irascible and aggressive. Once she saw him push her and Shele fell. The nanny was afraid to imagine how abusive the man behaved toward the deceased when she wasn't home. Investigators by then were also leaning toward the husband being behind Shele's murder because he was the only one with a motive for the crime. Having access to her correspondences, the man learned that Shele was planning to remove him from the will, and he couldn't let that happen and decided to act. His wife's death was extremely lucrative for him. He would receive an inheritance and a hefty $1 million life insurance policy on her life. In addition, the police knew he had a key and could easily break into his ex's apartment, kill her, and leave the premises unharmed. Detectives were amazed at how insensitive a person you have to be to leave your young children alone with their dead mother and let them find her body, to see the most horrible picture of their lives. Shele's daughter was still seeing a psychologist for a long time because of the psychological trauma she had suffered. But unfortunately, there was no direct evidence against him. No DNA or fingerprints. This case could have been quite controversial in court. Because of this, police officers were hesitant to arrest him and press charges. So the investigation continued. Shele's insurance and inheritance were suspended during the investigation. A new custody trial for the deceased's children also began. Rod wanted to get custody so that he could have access to his wife's finances through the children, but her parents were adamantly opposed to this. They didn't want to allow an Alfonso to have access to the money of a woman they thought had died through his fault. In addition, they knew from Shele's words that Rod did not like children, treated them badly, and often beat them. This was confirmed by the children themselves. At this trial, even his parents opposed Rod, who accused their son of abusing the children and stealing $80,000 from them. As a result, custody of the children was given to the parents of the deceased. Meanwhile, Rod was abandoned by everyone, and for the first time he was forced to provide for himself, having no means of subsistence. The man got a job as a debt collector and started going door to door to collect debts. Among other things, by force and his aggression, he instilled fear in debtors who complained about him. In the end, his career never took off, and Rod was fired. As time passed, the police had no solid evidence against the husband. This case could have remained unsolved if in 2015, one of Rod's former lovers had not contacted the police. The woman decided to finally turn in her former lover and tell her that he confessed to her about the murder of his spouse. According to her, Rod was very greedy for his wife's money, and because of this reason, he decided to kill. He was indifferent to the children, but he tried to get custody of them too, because of mercantile interest. The woman also shocked all the detectives with new information. Rod planned to kill Shele's parents, leaving their death as an accident, and thus regain custody and get access to his dead wife's money. But all his plans failed one by one. Then he started thinking of involving his daughter, who was a teenager at the time, in the realization of the plan. He tried to convince her that charges of harassment should be brought against her grandfather, but the girl categorically refused to participate in this. To prove her words, the former mistress presented the police with voice messages sent to her from Rod's cell phone. Now, the police had new evidence. Based on the testimony of his mistress and these reports, Rod was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife in November 2015. This news came as a blow to Rod, who was confident of his impunity and planned to get away with murdering his wife, taking all her millions with him. The trial began in 2019. At the trial, Rod denied all the allegations against him. He denied that he planned the murder, was in his wife's apartment that morning, killed her, and planned to kill her parents to get close to the money. On the prosecution side, there were numerous witnesses who spoke with one voice about Rod's abuse of his wife and children, as well as his affairs on the left and his intentions to gain access to all of his wife's money and lose control of the situation in the event of a divorce. According to the prosecutor, the defendant was motivated to get rid of his wife for money. He had a key to the apartment. He knew how to do a chokehold, which was used to kill her. Shele, though, there was no direct evidence against the family in the case, but there was enough circumstantial evidence. A mistress appeared at the trial and testified against Rod. This finally convinced the jury that he was guilty. Rod encouraged them to ask the court not to send their father to prison, given that the children had already lost one parent and did not want to lose the other. The 12-year-old son spoke at the trial, and the 18-year-old daughter, though absent, relayed a plea to feel sorry for her father. However, these requests did not move the jury. They were found guilty. Rod was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. To date, the killer is currently incarcerated at the Attica Correctional Institution in Attica, New York. On July 5, 2018, residents of the Manrique district in the city of Medellin, Colombia, were searching for a 16-year-old girl who had disappeared 7 days earlier. She had said she was going to her best friend's birthday party, but never returned home. Her mother prayed to God for the police to find her, even if she were dead. She could no longer bear the uncertainty of not knowing where her daughter was. On that day, as if by miracle, they called her and informed her family of the whereabouts of the missing girl. Officers, along with her relatives, then headed to that location. Sometime before that, the stepfather of the girl had noticed something behind the house. There were very large tracks, as if someone had been dragged on the ground. He followed the tracks and found a place where a swarm of flies circled. The man tried to get closer, but the horrible smell caught him off guard. Nevertheless, he decided to lift the rocks to see what was underneath. What he saw took his breath away. There was a completely disfigured head. Melany Steisy Amaya was born on February 22, 2002, in the municipality of San Rafael, Colombia. Her parents, William Amaya and Maria Leon, were overjoyed at her arrival. Despite being very young, they had long planned for the birth of their daughter and finally realized their desire. After some time, the family grew with the addition of another child, Natalie. The sisters got along very well with each other and constantly played together from childhood. Melany was characterized by her zest for life and cheerfulness, and her smile was her main distinguishing feature. Additionally, she was very playful. Melany often asked her mother for cosmetics to paint her dolls. Although her parents didn't have a lot of money, they always tried to provide her with everything she needed. In school, Melany was one of the best students and consistently received excellent grades. Over the years, she developed a very strong character. She was proud and always wanted to be right in everything. However, this did not prevent her from maintaining excellent relations with her mother. If they argued, they always reconciled quickly. When Melany became a teenager, her parents separated but maintained a good relationship. Soon after, Maria met Ruben Morales, and they became a couple. After a while, they decided to move in together and settled in the Manrique district in the city of Medellin. Maria's daughters had a great relationship with their stepfather. They considered him their second father. Ruben, in turn, respected their bond with William and always reminded them that he was there to help with their upbringing, but didn't want them to stop seeing their father. By the age of 16, Melany was already a very beautiful girl who loved dressing up and having fun. She had many friends who highly valued her. Around the same time, she discovered her passion for electronic music and decided that she wanted to become a DJ. Since her family supported her in everything, they began saving money to buy a mixer, confident that whatever she set her mind to, she would succeed. However, Melany was never able to fulfill her dream. On Thursday, June 28, 2018, Melany was applying makeup for a party celebrating the birthday of her best friend, Isaac. Despite already having celebrated his birthday a week earlier, they were planning to attend another party scheduled to take place in a nightclub located on Carrera 45 Street in an area known for its nightlife. After finishing getting ready, she told her mother that she was leaving. Her mother asked her to take care of herself and not to come back too late. Melany then got into her Uber and headed to the party. However, she never made it to the destination. When Isaac arrived at the nightclub, he immediately noticed that she was not there. Loud techno music filled the air and the place was crowded. He searched for Melany everywhere but couldn't find her. He started texting her, but she didn't respond. The young man thought that maybe she was with her friend and decided to wait until the next day. Maria woke up at 7 a.m. and noticed that her daughter hadn't returned to her room. Everything was as she left it the night before when she was getting ready for the club. Concerned, she started calling her, but the phone was unreachable. The woman thought maybe the battery had died, and Melany was at a friend's place, but it was still strange that she hadn't tried to call her back. Maria then decided to call Isaac. He informed her that Melany hadn't come to the party and that she might be with a friend. After that, she reached out to all of her daughter's acquaintances, but no one knew where she was. Finally, she managed to talk to friends who revealed that Melany did approach the club's door, but didn't go inside. They thought she might have gone to another party. Completely desperate, Maria called her ex-husband and shared the horrifying news. He tried to reassure her, saying that it was still very early, and maybe Melany was sleeping at someone else's house. However, noon came, and Melany still hadn't appeared. Her parents attempted to file a report at the police station, but since it was a weekend, the report wasn't accepted, and they were advised to wait until Monday. Trying to maintain composure, the parents thought that perhaps she had gone to some village to celebrate the long weekend. Maybe she didn't have signal on her mobile phone, and that's why she wasn't in touch. But deep down, they knew it wasn't true. They felt that something terrible had happened. Maria, Ruben, and William began the search for Melany. They went everywhere they thought she could be, in the homes of acquaintances, parks, streets, and the nightclubs she frequently visited. After the initial attempt, they decided to plaster the city with posters containing a detailed description of the girl. The posters featured a photo Melany took on the night of her disappearance. She was dressed in a short blouse, light blue jeans, and white sneakers. The image was accompanied by a description of her physical characteristics: slim, short, with black hair and brown eyes. She had several tattoos, such as a rose on her forearm, a moon on her back, wings, and two distinctive ones: a fish on her right leg covering a motorcycle exhaust burn, and a tattoo below her collarbone with the inscription, "Crazy Life." They handed out flyers to passers-by and police officers on the streets, conveying their desperation and urging immediate official search efforts. The news spread quickly, and all social media platforms were filled with photos of Melany. The weekend passed in the worst possible way. Maria couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about her daughter. Finally, Monday morning arrived, and she went to the police station to file a missing person report. The search was classified as urgent since the girl was a minor. The police checked hospitals and morgues to determine if there was any information about someone matching Melany's name or physical description, but they found no traces of her. The girl's parents clung to the hope of finding her alive. However, as the days passed, her absence became increasingly worrisome until finally, the first lead emerged. A witness came to the police station to provide testimony. He recounted that on the night of June 28th, he saw Melany near a football field, not far from the Manrique neighborhood. He noticed that the young girl was dirty and covered in mud, as if she had fallen. She was accompanied by a young man in baggy clothes, a cap, and large sneakers. Throughout the time she was on the field, she didn't speak, stood in a corner, and seemed completely lost. While these testimonies contributed to the investigation, the situation remained complex. The description of the guy who was with Melany was quite generic, and many of her friends dressed similarly. However, Maria remembered one person, Miguel Angel Naranjo Pareja, her daughter's ex-boyfriend. The young man was 18 years old, and their relationship had ended somewhat unsuccessfully 3 months ago. Maria asked her younger daughter to contact Miguel. He claimed to know nothing about Melany's whereabouts, mentioning that he hadn't seen her in several weeks. After this conversation, Miguel became extremely distressed and stated that he would die if something happened to her because he still loved her deeply. However, a few days later, new testimonies emerged that contradicted Miguel's statements. Several people claimed to have seen them together near the club that evening. They also mentioned that he was very drunk. Following these statements, officers began considering Miguel as the prime suspect in the girl's disappearance. They obtained a search warrant for his home but found no traces of Melany. Once again, the police were back to square one, with no clue about the whereabouts of the young woman. On July 5th of the same year, Maria woke up in complete distress. She couldn't believe that her daughter was still missing. She prayed to God to bring her back, whether alive or dead, as she could no longer bear the uncertainty. Her prayers were answered, and on that same day, Maria received a phone call. However, what she was told did not bode well. The number was unknown, but without hesitation, the woman answered on the other end. A voice came through, instructing her to stop searching for her daughter because she was already in another world and buried on a hill called El Calvario, without further questions. The person asked Maria not to report him to the police, as he hadn't spoken earlier out of fear. After the call ended, she hurried to the police station, and along with her husband and 2 officers, went to the specified location. She also warned all her acquaintances to help in the search. The area was vast, with many entrances and overgrown with bushes. To reach the hill, they had to overcome numerous steep stairs and pass by squatter houses. Therefore, it was decided to split into several groups to cover the territory more quickly. Ruben went to a section overgrown with bushes behind one of the houses. He noticed large tracks on the ground as if someone had been dragged. Following the path, he came across a place where a swarm of flies circled, and a strong odor lingered. He took a stick and started moving stones on the ground. Under one of them, Ruben saw something horrifying, a human head. He immediately called the police who were conducting the search nearby. Initially, they thought it might not be a human, as this area was known for discarding animals. They continued moving stones and saw blood. Finally, they managed to get a good look at the face. It was severely disfigured, but it was evident that it was a human head. Maria couldn't stop crying. Until the last moment, she refused to believe it was her daughter, but when they uncovered the body, all doubts were dispelled. Despite the body being in a state of advanced decomposition, the tattoo on the girl's chest was visible. She was completely undressed. Her mouth was open and filled with dirt. All her teeth were knocked out, and one eye had popped out. In addition, there was something very strange. The person who buried her had covered her with calcium oxide. The body was exhumed by a team of forensic experts and taken to the Institute of Forensic Medicine and Criminology. A few hours later, the experts confirmed that it was none other than Melany Steisy Amaya. Although traces of all kinds of violence were found on her body, the cause of death was mechanical asphyxia. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, it was impossible to determine whether she had been sexually assaulted. The only thing they could confirm was that she had been severely beaten. Melany's relatives were devastated. The hope of finding her alive was gone, but they could still seek justice for the heinous crime committed against her. The media reported the discovery, and all eyes turned to Ruben. Some considered the fact that he found the body alone as making him a potential suspect. However, the residents of Manrique had a different opinion. They knew Melany had no enemies, but understood who might wish her harm. Everyone was aware that her relationship with Miguel ended on bad terms, and he was known to be a rather cruel young man. Meanwhile, the young man continued sending messages to Melany's relatives, expressing his deep sorrow for her loss and stating that he would do everything possible to find her. However, no one believed him anymore. A furious mob of neighbors gathered at his home, intending to lynch him, taking advantage of the situation. The police took him to the police station, assuring him that they would ensure his safety. However, the real purpose was to interrogate him. He provided statements quickly, asserting his innocence and expressing great confidence in his words. As there was no evidence against him, he had to be released. Almost simultaneously, charges against Ruben were dropped. There was no evidence pointing to his involvement in the murder. Still considering Miguel as the main suspect, investigators began to find out what kind of relationship he had with Melany. According to people close to the girl, the couple met in 2016 when she was 14 and he was 17. Melany organized a party with her best friends and hired a DJ, which turned out to be Miguel. She was enamored with him, and the next week they started chatting. After a while, a relationship developed between them, and the couple went everywhere together, including outings with friends. Miguel was liked by everyone the girl knew. They noticed that he treated her with respect and that he loved her very much. Over time, the young man began to spend more and more time at Melany's house, and he became an integral part of the family. Maria claimed that Miguel had problems with his mother, and the young man told her that she often beat him and sometimes left him hungry. In the first months of living together, everything was wonderful. They were closer than ever, but over time, the relationship between the teenagers began to deteriorate. Miguel and Melany constantly argued, and the boy was most bothered by the fact that the girl liked to dress provocatively. She was so upset by their quarrels that she decided to drop out of school and started engaging in something she had never done before, using psychoactive substances. It took Maria some time to realize this and talk to her daughter. She said she only did it a few times, always in the company of Miguel. This caused the young man to lose the trust and respect of the family, and since then, the situation has only worsened. The arguments became brutal and escalated into physical violence. Miguel constantly abused Melany, leaving marks on her neck and arms. One day, he beat her so severely that the entire room was covered in blood. Maria tried to help her daughter, but Melany asked her not to interfere in their relationship. She begged her to allow them to continue living together. Her friends were also concerned. They noticed her spirit fading, and they saw her crying every day. After 2 years of being together, on May 23, 2018, the young couple had their final and extremely cruel argument. Melany decided to break up with Miguel for good and kicked him out of her house. However, the young man didn't accept it. He began to stalk her and follow her everywhere. Then Ruben decided to file a report with the prosecutor's office stating that his stepdaughter was in danger and requested a restraining order. Unfortunately, this measure was never implemented. Over the next few months, Miguel continued to search for Melany. He swore to her that if she gave him another chance, he would do things differently. However, she never agreed. And without any police assistance, the young woman tried to go about her life as usual until a terrible event occurred on June 28th. Receiving more evidence about the relationship between the young individuals, the police investigated Miguel's criminal history. They found that despite his young age, the guy already had encounters with the police. Records indicated that he had assaulted his mother, siblings, and sisters. Additionally, they obtained a statement filed by Ruben several months ago and testimonies from one of Melany's acquaintances. This young man stated that Miguel had told him that if he found out she was dating someone else, he would kill her. But that wasn't the most shocking revelation. The person who called Maria decided to disclose his identity. He was a relative of the young man, living with him in the house located in the Granisol area, very close to where Melany's body was found. He recounted that on June 29th, around midnight, he saw Miguel coming into the house with a shovel in hand, and his shoes were dirty. A few minutes later, the young man started a bonfire and began burning clothes and cosmetics. Afterward, he took a long shower. Gathering all the evidence, on July 10th of the same year, officers obtained an arrest warrant for Miguel. The young man voluntarily appeared at the police station where he was charged with murder under aggravating circumstances. However, he denied the charges and, with a strange smile on his face, pleaded not guilty. After 6 months of prolonged legal proceedings, Miguel decided to enter into a plea deal. He agreed to the charges that identified him as the perpetrator in exchange for a reduced sentence. Right after that, he recounted the final hours of the young woman's life. On June 28, 2018, Miguel saw Melany in front of the nightclub where Isaac's birthday was supposed to be celebrated. He approached her to talk, but quickly noticed that she was exchanging messages with another guy, triggering uncontrollable jealousy in him. He couldn't believe she already had another suitor, and an argument ensued, escalating into a brutal fight. Miguel struck her forcefully, knocking her to the ground. A few hours later, they went to a football field, where the altercation continued. At some point, he grabbed her by the neck and strangled her until she died. When he went to hide the body, he sprinkled lime on her, having seen in a movie that people used it to eliminate the smell of decay. Miguel then returned home, burned the girl's clothes and belongings. At the end of his testimony, the young man expressed satisfaction that he had acted under the influence of prohibited substances. His account was somewhat vague, and Miguel refused to specify where he buried Melany and how exactly he concealed the body. Officers speculated that after leading her to the football field, he convinced her to go and talk alone near the spot where he later buried her. They were only certain of two things. Miguel was guilty of the girl's murder, and his motive for the crime was jealousy and obsession. Psychological tests indicated that he was aggressive, possessive, and volatile. However, they also established that at the time of the crime, he was sane, so he had to face trial. On Friday, January 18, 2019, nearly 7 months after the girl's murder, the first hearing took place. Miguel was found guilty of the charge of murdering the woman under aggravating circumstances and was sentenced to 34 years and 8 months of imprisonment. After the jury announced the verdict, he apologized to Melany's relatives and the community. Although the girl's family was satisfied, they all stated that they would never forgive him.
Can I speak to your son?
Hello?
Sir, this is a 911 operator.
Okay.
Can you check? I asked her if she can do CPR. I can help you with that if someone needs assistance.
He's not breathing.
All right, do you want to do CPR?
I don't know. He's not breathing. He's not breathing, and I don't know.
This exact kind of frightening call was received by the 911 service on the morning of May 25, 2013, a day when Marshall University was celebrating the graduation of a new generation of professionals. Mark and Joanna McDermott were supposed to be among the parents of hundreds of students receiving their diplomas. However, their day took an unexpected turn. This is the story of Mark McDermott, a model family man who was betrayed by someone he, although not related by blood, considered and raised as his own son for nearly 20 years. Mark McDermott was born in the early 1960s in Australia. Little is known about his upbringing and personal life, but it is known that Mark was the eldest of 5 siblings. The only known relatives are his father, Bruce McDermott, and 2 younger sisters, Tracy and Nicole, with Nicole being the youngest. According to some close acquaintances, Mark was not only a successful businessman, but also a kind and responsive person. Nicole described her older brother as a wonderful person who could never intentionally harm anyone. Very little is known about Mark's life, including his adult life. However, it is certain that at some point, he traveled to the southern United States. The circumstances and reasons for this trip remain unknown. It was in the US that he met Joanna Dunn, a single mother with a 4-year-old child. Even less information is available about Joanna's life, with most of what is known coming from her own accounts. However, the words she publicly shared were almost entirely dedicated to her son, who is the second main character in this story. Donald Wayne Dunn was born in the early 1990s in West Virginia, where he lived his entire life with his mother's family. His grandparents played a significant role in his childhood, as they cared for him for most of the time. The reason Joanna, a working single mother, entrusted much of Donald's upbringing to his grandparents was that she found it challenging to raise a child alone. Even when they did manage to spend time together, Joanna resorted to video games and television to entertain Donald on the rare days they were home together. It was difficult for her to give him all her attention. However, everything changed with Mark's entry into their lives. The couple quickly started a relationship, and soon after, they got married. Joanna took her husband's last name, and all three moved to West Virginia, becoming a very close-knit family. From the beginning, Mark and Donald had a very close relationship, as if they were truly related by blood. Some who knew them, including Mark's sisters and father, confidently said that Mark treated the boy as his own son, and Donald, in turn, regarded him as his only father. Their strong bond was tested when Donald was still a minor, and Mark and Joanna's relationship went through a difficult period, ending in a temporary separation. Despite Mark leaving alone for some time, Donald insisted on living with him rather than his mother during those months. The family had to endure another difficult period when Joanna was diagnosed with cancer. However, supporting each other, they managed to get through these tough times. Mark always made sure that his stepson had a comfortable life without any deprivation. He ensured that Donald never lacked anything he needed. Although Donald was a simple person who never asked for much, he seemed grateful for the peaceful and luxurious life his stepfather provided him. In 2008, when Donald graduated from high school, Mark took on the financial responsibility for his higher education at Rio Nueva Community College, where he studied for 2 years. Mark continued to pay for his education even when, in 2010, Donald transferred to Marshall University. Despite the fact that Donald was living with his girlfriend, with whom he had been in a relationship since he was 15, and her family, he always enjoyed the unconditional support of Mark and Joanna. It's noteworthy that their financial assistance was not limited to just tuition fees. They also covered his expenses for clothing, car insurance, and paid for his living and food expenses. Donald only had to focus on his studies. A responsible and dedicated young man, he strictly followed his daily routine and often canceled or declined plans with loved ones, citing the need to complete practical work or review materials for upcoming exams. Throughout his 5 years of university education, he adhered to this lifestyle, aiming to graduate on time without falling behind in any semester. Saturday, May 25, 2013, was set to be a significant day for him to receive his university diploma. However, what was supposed to be a special occasion for celebration turned into a bitter moment that would forever change his life. As the McDermotts were preparing for Donald's graduation ceremony, a distressing call was made to 911 from their home.
What is your name?
Joanna McDermott, I shot my husband.
Okay, is he breathing?
No.
Was it an accident?
No, we were fighting.
You were fighting?
Yes, it was supposed to be a happy day. It's his graduation.
Your child's graduation? Okay, is your child okay?
Will the police be coming too?
Yes.
Authorities immediately headed to the McDermotts' home. Sergeant Greg Keaton of the Raleigh County Sheriff's Office was one of the first law enforcement representatives to arrive at the scene. Upon arrival, he found Joanna, who appeared to be in a state of severe shock. Moving further into the house, he saw Mark, who was lifelessly lying on the couch in the living room, seemingly reading a book at the time of his death. At first glance, the 54-year-old man had 2 gunshot wounds to the head. When investigators moved the body, they discovered a 3rd wound in the back of the shoulder. The medical examiner who arrived at the scene confirmed that although the cause of death was the head wounds, death was likely not instantaneous. The amount of blood at the scene indicated that the longer Mark was alive, the more blood he lost. According to initial versions of the incident, Donald was preparing for his significant day, and the noise of the shower drowned out the loud sound of the gunshot, so he did not realize that Joanna had shot his stepfather until he came out of the bathroom and found the body in the living room.
All right, how old is your husband?
My husband is 54.
And you were just fighting?
Yes.
All right, did you shoot him in the side?
No, in the head.
In the head?
Yes.
Okay, try not to touch the bed, okay?
My son is in the bathroom. I want to try to go downstairs so he can help me.
So, how old is your son?
23.
All right, does he know what happened?
No, he doesn't know. He's downstairs getting ready for graduation.
The pistol was lying on the dining table next to a letter, presumably written by Joanna and addressed to Donald. In it, the distraught woman explained to her son that her marriage had become unbearable, and that she could not remain in a relationship with someone she no longer loved. She also apologized for leaving his life without seeing him become a man. At that moment, Joanna and Donald were taken in separate cars to the Raleigh County Sheriff's Office, where an officer was to take their statements. Since Joanna called the emergency services, the case appeared to be another instance of domestic violence with a tragic end. In her conversation with the operator, Joanna claimed that she and Mark had argued, and in a fit of rage, without realizing her actions, she shot him in the head with her pistol. This was unexpected to the officers who took her for questioning, as she then made a confession that overturned her initial version, and thus, the entire course of the investigation. When the doors of the police car closed, Joanna revealed that in reality, it wasn't she who deprived Mark of his life, but her son, Donald. However, this was not all that the woman could tell, as the story turned out to be much more complicated than the investigators had assumed. Once in the interrogation room, Joanna explained to Captain James Barr of the Raleigh County Sheriff's Office the chronology of all the events that transpired on May 25, 2013. She mentioned that her son's graduation was scheduled for the early part of the day. In the morning, she had left to run some errands and buy groceries. Joanna returned home, and as she was about to get out of her car, Donald approached her and asked her to close her eyes and follow him into the house because he had a surprise for her. Trusting that her son had prepared something special, she blindly followed him into the dining room, where he suggested she sit down. At that moment, Joanna heard a distinctive click, and, when she finally turned to look at her son, she found herself face to face with the barrel of her own pistol, which was in Donald's hands. The gun did not fire, and Joanna, completely frightened, managed to grab it and wrest it from her son's hands. She managed to overcome her panic, which allowed her to think clearly and devise a plan of action to save herself from becoming Donald's second victim. Seeing Mark's lifeless body, she quickly told her son that she was going to call emergency services and take the blame for the crime. Although the young man initially seemed to doubt her plan, he eventually agreed. During the interrogation, Joanna explained that she decided to call emergency services to protect herself from her own son, understanding that by confessing to a crime she did not commit, she would end up behind bars. Joanna added that she was sure that if she didn't do this, Donald would try to end her life. She also confessed that in the 23 years she had been his mother, she never thought her son would point a gun at her head and pull the trigger. The gun used by Donald belonged to her, and she explained that the only reason it did not fire was probably because she had pulled the slide back far enough on the semi-automatic weapon, which prevents a normal shot. Captain Barr explained that Joanna's story seemed entirely logical to him because from the first moment he saw Donald, he had a feeling that something was off. He noted that considering the severity of the situation, the 23-year-old young man appeared unusually calm and always maintained a neutral facial expression. For this reason, he ordered Donald to be placed in a separate interrogation room, away from his mother. From the beginning of the interrogation, Donald denied any involvement in the death of his stepfather, and this facade effortlessly crumbled after he was informed of Joanna's statements. James Barr did not have to resort to any intimidation tactics to get the young man to confess to the crime, nor did he have to pressure him or demand that he provide all the information to piece together all the details of the case. Donald voluntarily told him everything he wanted to know, and the story that unfolded was almost unbelievable. It all started after Donald finished his first year of college. Apparently, he was not doing very well in his studies and decided to drop out due to poor grades. He shared that initially, his classes were simple, and all he had to do was show up in the right room at the right time to get good grades. However, as the semester progressed, it required more and more effort. According to the young man, he felt that he did not have the strength to continue his studies. Instead of telling the truth, he decided to lie to Mark and Joanna. However, his close relatives were not the only ones he deceived. His girlfriend and her family were also unaware of what was happening. According to Rachel Rush, his girlfriend's sister, Donald, maintained a routine that gave the impression he was attending classes. He would leave and return home at regular times and spent most of the day in his room. He asked not to be disturbed under the pretense that he needed to focus on finishing an assignment or preparing for a test. The young man even falsified his grade reports. All this was just a carefully thought-out deception that continued for 4.5 years. None of the people in Donald's life suspected he was lying to them. His family's faith in him remained unchanged throughout the years, while he pretended to be a student. Joanna and Mark had no idea their son was misusing the money they provided and supported him throughout. not only financially but also emotionally. Donald claimed that he never intended to lie to his close ones for so long, but as more days passed, telling the truth became harder. The one thing that held him back from being honest was the possibility that Mark and Joanna would stop paying for all his expenses. Although he seemingly did not attach much importance to many of his material possessions, such as a car and expensive clothes, in reality, he did not want to give up his lifestyle, considering he had a lot to lose if his parents found out the truth. Over several months, Donald developed what he thought was the perfect plan to get away with everything. From the beginning, he intended to end his parents' lives. To avoid suspicion, he planned to leave a note similar to the one found on the dining table with the pistol. Donald thought that when the authorities read the note, they would conclude that the crime was committed by a woman trapped in an unhappy marriage who saw no other way out than to take her husband's life and then her own. Donald told Captain Barr that on May 25th, he surreptitiously took Joanna's pistol and kept it with him all day while pretending to prepare for his graduation. Before the second part of his plan failed, the young man decided to go to the supermarket so that the surveillance cameras would record him, thus providing him with an alibi. However, he did not anticipate that his mother's gun would jam at the moment he was about to pull the trigger, aiming at her head. Alex Willis, a close friend of Mark, told True Crime Daily that in the months leading up to this event, Donald had begun to show interest in shooting ranges. Although it seemed strange to him at the time, he never questioned it because it never occurred to him that the reason his friend wanted to learn more about firearms and how to shoot was his desire to attack the man who had raised him since he was 4 years old. The deliberations and conclusions that Donald reached baffled everyone who heard them. Later, James Barr shared that the young man confessed he had even planned the emotions he would display on his face when authorities arrived at the scene. He also thought about how he would financially support himself after losing the stable income provided by Mark, and decided to exploit the sympathy of his relatives as long as he could while they supported him. He planned to engage in sports to improve his physical form and, ultimately, when he had no other choice, to enlist in the police or the army. Reflecting on the real chances of success for his plan, Donald decided it would be easier to kill his mother and stepfather than to admit that he had been lying to them for almost 5 years. According to a legal document from the Supreme Court of West Virginia, published in April 2016, a month after his arrest in June 2013, Donald was charged with first-degree murder and attempted murder. Even before the trial, Donald and his legal team sought ways to delay the proceedings. A few weeks before the scheduled start of the hearings, the defendant, who was already in solitary confinement, had to undergo surgery on his right hand. His lawyers used the surgical intervention as a pretext to request a delay in the start of the process, arguing that during the initial sessions, Donald would be under the influence of strong painkillers. To decide on this matter, the court first required medical documents of the defendant. Eventually, the request was denied on the grounds that during the preliminary hearing, Donald showed no signs of being partially incapacitated due to painkillers. Therefore, the court deemed him competent to participate in the trial and approved the continuation of the established schedule. The trial took place in August 2014, more than a year after Mark's tragic death. The jury trial was presided over by Judge John A. Hutchinson, with David White serving as Donald's attorney and Christine Keller representing the Raleigh County Prosecutor's Office. Mark's 2 sisters, accompanied by one of their nieces, traveled more than 15,000 kilometers from Australia to witness the trial of the man whom they had considered a family member for nearly 20 years. Although detailed information from witness testimonies or evidence presented to the jury is not available, and there is a lack of photos and video materials, it is known that the defense wanted to include in their opening arguments that Donald was under the influence of illegal drugs at the time of the crime. However, there is no evidence that this was ever mentioned before or confirmed by any toxicological tests. A few days after the initial hearing, specifically on August 14, 2014, Donald Dunn was found guilty of first-degree murder of his stepfather, Mark McDermott, attempted murder of his mother, Joanna McDermott, and the use of a firearm. On September 5th of the same year, Judge John Hutchinson sentenced Donald to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole for the murder of his stepfather, and to 15 years in prison for the attempted murder of his own mother. After the sentence was announced, Joanna read an emotional letter to the court that she had prepared. In her statement, Donald's mother mentioned that something bad had happened at some point in her son's life, possibly after the illness of his grandparents, the pressure she put on him to study at the university, or the violent video games he played even when he was very young. She expressed her disapproval of the public image created of her son. She made it clear that she disagreed with the sentence handed down to him. But Judge Hutchinson responded that Joanna's disapproval had no impact on his decision. She made it clear that she disagreed with the sentence handed down to him. But Judge Hutchinson responded that Joanna's disapproval had no impact on his decision. He expressed his opinion that the sentence he imposed was the only way to restore justice in an unjust situation. He sympathized with the defendant's mother, as even under the circumstances, she wanted to shield her son from the consequences of his actions. After the verdict, Mark's sister and father expressed that they still could not understand how Donald could have taken the life of a man who had raised him as his own son for 19 years. Although the sentence would not bring back Mark, they were grateful for the verdict that was rendered.
Thank you for watching this video. The old voiceover was used here, but now it's much higher quality. Hit like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and check out new videos. See you soon.